Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our March edition of Inside Immigration. These 30-minute calls cover the latest developments and updates inside Canadian immigration. If you have any questions, you can contact us via info@gans.com or by the email addresses provided on screen now. Today, we're joined by Senior Associate Aris Daghighian and partner Shoshana Green. Welcome, Shoshana. Welcome, Aris. And I'll leave it with you guys to take it away.
Thanks, Stephen. It's Shoshana speaking, and we're with Aris and I, and we're just going to sort of give an update on where the world stands from a Canadian immigration perspective. Initially, we want to reassure everybody that from an inside Canada perspective, it's technically business as usual. Obviously, it's a new usual, but immigration is functioning. Applications are being accepted. There is no pause on processing. Applications can be submitted from inside Canada, including extensions or spousal sponsorships, those applications that are being processed here, and all the online applications for applications not just within Canada, from abroad, are also being accepted. So from a business perspective, that continues. There are obviously circumstances where certain documentation cannot be provided, and immigration has confirmed that extensions are being granted basically for everything when documentation cannot be provided due to the current circumstances. In addition, when people from abroad have confirmation of permanent residence documentation, that due to travel restrictions from other countries, they cannot come to Canada before the expiry dates on those. There is a process whereby applicants can request immigration to extend that documentation. Obviously, a clear explanation has to be provided. So that should ease people concerned with respect to that. With respect to immigration offices, as far as interviews or open to the public, they are closed. That is not business as usual. Citizenship testing and oaths are not taking place. There's a pause on that. Any hearings within the Immigration and Refugee Board are being paused. The only hearings that are taking place are detention reviews, obviously through remote means only, and the courts, there's only emergency motions on a very exceptional basis, as removals are being put on pause as well, other than very few are taking place. So that's the day-to-day perspective as far as immigration processing. And we are recommending that those individuals who have documents that will be expiring, normally we recommend usually 3 to 4 months in advance, we would recommend that those applications be put in at least 6 months, because everything, obviously immigration is operating, but it's still at a diminished capacity for processing. So to ensure that, I mean, we don't know how long things will take, but the sooner the better as far as putting the applications in and ensuring that those are in place. And as far as traveling, we're going to get into now the travel prohibitions. Things became a lot clearer last night when the government released new orders in council that set out more specifically and clear with respect to travel prohibitions. It's all of as of March 26th. And Aris, do you want to take us through that? Let's start with the United States, people physically present in the United States, what their circumstances include at this time as far as traveling into Canada.
Sure. So as of last night, there are 2 new orders in council that have been issued by the government under the Quarantine Act. And the first one relates to those who are in the United States and intending to travel to Canada from the United States. And the second relates to all other countries. So any country entering Canada from any country other than the United States. Starting first with those entering from the United States, it is a very broad prohibition or very broad test. As long as an individual's purpose for entry is not optional or discretionary, such as tourism, recreation, or entertainment, they should be allowed into Canada if they've been in the US for the past 14 days. So they have to have been in the US for 14 days, subject to some exemptions, which we can talk about, and their purpose has to be not optional and not discretionary. Now, the first question everyone has is, well, what counts as optional or discretionary? And the answer is, unfortunately, that has not yet been specified. What IRCC and the government have said is that they intend for business travel at least to proceed unimpeded. So this implies that it won't only be restricted to those who are coming in to do essential or critical work, such as truck drivers or agricultural workers, but it'll be broader and potentially apply to anyone who is traveling to Canada for a business purpose. Along the same lines, family members in the United States, arguably, if they are trying to be reunited with an immediate family member in Canada, that purpose is not optional or discretionary, and so they can potentially make their application for entry on those grounds. But there is not a lot of specificity other than that with respect to who qualifies and who does not. It's going to be a bit of a wait and see, or as the first individuals apply, we might get a better sense of how this restriction is being applied at the border. Shoshana, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, basically, let's say who we know can get in. Let's just clarify who is able to travel to a land border or get on a plane, who we know from the US who can get in. Let's go through that list maybe. I mean, we know, generally work permit holders, study permit holders. I mean, basically, who, let's just clarify that, Aris. Who's going to be able to get in technically? I mean, who will be able to satisfy the airlines?
Yeah, we think that as long as someone holds a valid work permit or a study permit, or they're able to show they have an immediate family member in Canada, that should be enough to satisfy the border officers that their purpose is not optional or discretionary. It's not for tourism or recreation or entertainment. The airlines themselves flying from the US have been directed to, they're not supposed to apply too strict, this is from the US, too strict of an application of what is optional or discretionary. They're supposed to verify that the individual understands what the ordering council says, and then the border is going to determine for US people coming from the US whether or not they qualify under this optional and discretionary category. It's different, however, from those from other countries. So there's a separate ordering council with respect to those from other countries.
Yeah, let's just clarify that. When you're talking about the United States, let's clarify that it's not just US citizens, but it's any foreign nationals who are found in the US.
Right.
Fall into that United States ordering council. It's not limited to US citizens or green card holders. It's anybody can present the applications from the US in that matter.
Right.
Now we're going to talk about the rest of the world, people who are physically outside of the United States and what their circumstance entails. Because as Aris said, there's a different law that was announced last night respecting those individuals.
Right. And so for anyone entering from outside of the US, so again, it's not citizenship based, as Shoshana just said. It's just if you're entering, attempting to come to Canada, fly to Canada from outside the US, the list, there's a specific list of who is exempt. And this specific list provides a lot more clarity. And it includes immediate family members of Canadian citizens or permanent residents. And immediate family members are actually defined more broadly than they're normally defined under immigration law. So in this context, immediate family members also include the parent or step parent of your spouse or common law partner. So your in-laws are included as immediate family, and also a guardian or tutor is included. So potentially this can be used in situations where a Canadian citizen or permanent resident child has a guardian who's not technically their parent, or a tutor who's not technically their parent, but they may qualify as an immediate family member under this exemption. They would of course have to have, in either case, the right documentation to show their relationship to their Canadian family member and their Canadian family member's status, their citizenship or their permanent residence. So a copy of their Canadian passport along with a marriage certificate or birth certificate, or evidence of a common partnership.
Yeah, like that. I think for that scenario, the documentation is going to be key, making it really clear and simple, because this will be the airlines who will be scrutinizing a lot of these applications. No, they're not applications. A lot of these individuals, when they present themselves to get on the flight. So it's got to be presented in a way that clearly allows an airline agent to understand the relationship. And, you know, if documents aren't in English, you may need to get them translated. Just making it really simple and easy for that airline person to understand the relationship.
Right.
That's sort of the first exception.
Right. And it would also be helpful to even maybe print out a copy of this exemption or the order in council, or contact our office so that we can put together a package that sort of highlights for the officers which exemption we believe you qualify for, and what supporting documents are included to support that exemption. Because these airline officials, this isn't usually their job, and so we need to make it and they're not as familiar with these exemptions and these orders in council as we are, and so we need to make it as simple as possible for them to avoid any complications.
Right, so let's go through the list for the exemptions here. But basically, I mean, go ahead. Yep.
Did you want to move on to temporary foreign workers now, or?
Yeah, let's do that.
So the temporary foreign workers, as long as someone holds a valid work permit, they are fine to enter Canada, and as long as they hold a work permit approval, and this work permit approval can have been issued previously, or it can be issued going forward. There's no limitation. As long as an individual is approved for a work permit or already holds a work permit, they should be allowed entry to Canada. And that would be the document that they show to the airline employee to allow them to board the flight as well. The problem, though, and I think, Shoshana, maybe you want to speak to this, is with respect to biometrics and whether or not a work permit approval can be issued to those who need biometrics, but they may not be able to.
Because practically speaking, yes, they're saying that the option is there to get new work permits, but the practical reality is, for the majority of individuals, biometrics is mandatory, and unfortunately the majority of those biometric centers are closed, so the information can't be collected. Perhaps the government may, I mean, the biometrics requirement is relatively new. Who knows, maybe they'll waive that requirement because of the practical sense. I mean, yes, technically Canada's open for business, but practically speaking, are there going to be new work permits issued for those who do need biometrics? It's an unknown at this point. It's an unknown.
Right. Another unknown is, for example, someone who holds a visa, a TRV, or who would be TRV exempt. So, but it's coming in for a business purpose. It's unknown whether that individual will be allowed to board a flight to come for an important meeting or some other, for example, they need to do work for less than 30 days, and normally they would not need a work permit. It's unknown how those individuals are going to be treated because they don't hold a valid work permit or work permit approval, despite the fact that they are coming to work for a short duration or for a business purpose. One solution is potentially that we would apply for that individual, our firm would apply for that individual for a special approval or permission letter, a letter of introduction, IRCC refers to it as, from the consulate, their local consulate, and that letter can then be presented to the airline to allow their entry to Canada. But that is still unknown at this point.
Yeah, so that, it's a bit, everything is still in the air with respect to the work permit issue. But the good news is at least the people previously issued, they can come in. Even when the new ones, if and when they are issued, technically speaking, they should be allowed to enter. So that's with respect to the work permit issue. Let's move on now to the study permits. That is more restrictive because it's basically they are limiting study permits issued before March 18th. The fact of getting new study permits, they are included in the travel ban. So technically, if you're able to obtain a study permit, you're going to have to wait unless you're in the United States for the new ones post March 18th. Any other issues on the study permits, Aris?
No, essentially, as you said, they are really restricting it to those students who were already studying or who had already made arrangements to study in Canada. They didn't want to disrupt those students from continuing their studies, many of whom, have rented homes in Canada and whatnot. But anyone else going forward will, for the foreseeable future, is not likely to be able to, students for study purposes, come into Canada on new permits. Moving on to I guess the other category, the other major category would be family, because we spoke about family members of citizens and permanent residents. But I'm sure many of you are thinking, what about family members of these foreign workers, these TFWs, or the students? Those who are here already as students with valid study permits or valid work permits, what about their family members? And so there is a special exemption for family reunification under the Order in Council. And this exemption applies to anyone who doesn't qualify for the regular family member exemption for citizens and permanent residents, either because their family member is not a citizen or permanent resident, they're a work permit holder, a study permit holder, or for some other reason. For example, they're a child, but they're over the age of 22. They're 22 or over, and so they don't qualify for that exemption. They can still make a special request, these family members, to IRCC in order to be issued permission for entry. And the way it would work is that the individuals would make a TRV application or an ETA application as they normally would. And in that application, they would include the necessary documentation and explanation of why they qualify under the family reunification exemption, or why they should qualify under this exemption. And then their TRV or their ETA will be issued along with a separate document. There's supposed to be a separate letter issued by IRCC that confirms, yes, this individual qualifies or is authorized for entry under the family reunification exemption. So that's
right, it's not that unusual sometimes for people on temporary work permits or even on study permits for that spouse to come to Canada, sort of get set up, make the foundation for the family, and then the dependents to come at a later point in time. So in those cases, the open spousal work permits for students or for workers, they'll have to make this extra application, but there is the potential there for the family to be reunited in Canada through this extra process, and the documentation to be provided by the consulate once that process is more defined. Right now, we don't actually know the process. They haven't provided the details, but I'm imagining it'll become apparent very, very shortly.
Right.
Yeah,
So
and then I think we got one more, Stephen. We got the national interest one. I think we want to touch on that as well. It's an exemption.
Oh, yes.
This one's on a higher level. This one is not a consular approval, Aris, correct? This one is a higher level where they don't fit into any of these exemptions, yet the person there's a need for that person to be permitted to enter Canada, and that's more on a national interest scale, and that has to be determined at a higher government level why this person should be permitted entry, notwithstanding the travel ban.
Right. That I think they've said case management branch, which is the head office in Ottawa, has to coordinate that, and the approval at the end of the day has to specifically be authorized by either the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, or the Minister of Public Safety. So one of those, the office of one of those three ministers has to issue an approval under the national interest exemption. Again, there is no definition of what constitutes national interest, so arguments can be made, applications can be submitted, and the determination will be made by case management branch coordinating with the office of three ministers.
Yeah, I think that pretty much covers the travel ban exemptions. Generally, there is a travel ban, but there are all these exemptions that will allow for the movement of certain individuals, again, depending where the individual is located, either within the United States or abroad. So it's clear the government is trying to find a balance of protecting Canadians, but also permitting families to be reunited and also permitting businesses to continue to function. There's also exemptions for certain particular industries, healthcare, obviously, agriculture, food services, medical, all of that will be given priority to facilitate the fight against this. I think from that perspective, that pretty much covers where we're at up until this point in time. Aris, do you have any other comments?
No, I mean, did we want to mention something with respect to the students who are currently in Canada and affected by this? By these?
Yeah, we could touch on that. Yeah, that's true. I mean, everybody, it is business as usual, but the students should not be concerned that their ability to get postgraduate work permits, if there's the students who are about to graduate this semester, April, May, obviously their classes are now virtual, and the government has said the virtual online learning as an integral component of finishing, it's not going to be held against them. They will accept that as being sort of the normal coursework, and they will be permitted to accept that virtual online course as part of the curriculum. And then the same guidelines exist as far as applying for the postgrad work permits within 6 months, but obviously the sooner the better. And that the limitations on working the 20 hours while full-time students will continue. Once the postgrad work permit is applied for, the full-time work experience can be pursued. So students should be rest assured that they will continue to have the ability to gain that Canadian experience, which will be crucial to future permanent residence applications should they wish to pursue them. But students are, we're going back to sort of business as usual. It continues. There's no real changes, notwithstanding the online components of their coursework.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's important. Some students are worried because some of them are, they've been dropped to part-time status, or their school is that they're not even studying, and IRCC understands that. And so the regular rules with respect to having to maintain full-time status and all of that, they're creating exemptions to that. So students shouldn't be worried.
Yeah, there's flexibility built in for them in that.
Well,
I
it
think
looks
that's
like,
where we're at, Stephen.
yeah, that's all we got time for today. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. I hope you all found it very informative. Again, if you have any questions, please email them to info@gans.com and we'll do our best to get to all your questions. Make sure to sign up to our alerts, the link provided, to stay up to date with the latest immigration news. And until next time, everybody stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.